Have you considered how the importance of the care we provide to older adults shifts and adapts within the rich mosaic of cultural backgrounds in our society? Today, we're going to explore not just how we communicate and interact with our older adults, but also how cultural diversity shapes their experiences and quality of life. Today, my guest is Dr. Rose Judy, with over 15 years of expertise as an aging and ethnic diversity consultant. Dr. Judy is the research lead on an ethnocultural elder abuse awareness project with Carya in Calgary. Her rich background in academia and research, combined with her roles in various esteemed organizations like the Canadian Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, her commitment to enhancing the lives of older adults through educational strategies and compassionate care is both inspiring as crucial for our understanding of older adult care in diverse communities. Throughout our conversation today, we talk about how to communicate with older adults with dignity, how to communicate with older adults with respect and sensitivity, the importance of cultural competence among caregivers, and the challenges and opportunities presented by the cultural diversity of those in senior living communities. Dr. Judy will share insights into how we can honor the personal and cultural histories of our older adults and those who care for them. She offers valuable advice for caregivers and professionals working in this field. So whether you're a caregiver, a professional in senior living, of someone interested in the well-being of older adults, this conversation is for you. Here is my interview with Dr. Rose Judy. Hi, Dr. Rose. We had the opportunity to meet in person, which was like a highlight of 2023 for me. And now we're here. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you for having me. It was such a treat to actually meet you in person. I was fangirling when I saw you, so thank you
Oh,
for that.
I did the same thing. I think I like went and found you and we're just like, well, we finally get to meet in person. So such a treat. Yeah. And I'm so glad we get to talk and learn from you. I learned so much from you just, witnessing the work that you share, but I know that there's deeper conversation we can have. So first, I want you to just tell us a little bit more about you, how you are in this space. And was there, I don't know, like a personal reason behind why you're doing what you're doing?
So I love sharing this story because I think it helps me in my own journey of exploring why I'm doing what I'm doing and where I want to go and see myself in the future. So I really started looking at my dad as a role model when he was an academic. And I knew when I was young that I had a knack for sharing knowledge and gathering the kids in the community or the area that we lived in back in Baghdad, and I would teach them English. Because I was raised in the UK. And so I just gather some kids from the streets and we'd do the regular ABCs. And I was a child myself doing that. But I think my parents had also noticed that I had this ability and in joy in sharing knowledge. And it was just something embedded in me, I think. And then when I came to completing my studies, or at least starting my studies at the university, and then and enhancing, I guess, my knowledge and education, I realized that I wanted to do psychology and I was interested in it, but I wanted to be an academic, to teach it and share the same excitement about psychology that I had with younger people and students. And so it was a natural realization for me, I think. And it was just, I knew what I wanted to do, which is to have a PhD in psychology, because I knew that to be an academic, I needed one. And so I wasn't in that phase in my undergrad of not knowing, which I'm very blessed to say I didn't have to go through that, because I knew after the bachelor comes the master's, and after the master's comes the PhD, and then hopefully the opportunities to teach, because I did want to become an academic. I focused, however, interestingly enough, though, through my master's and PhD research on visible minorities, marginalized, ethnically diverse people, and in particular focusing on refugees and immigrants. Because again, being an immigrant myself and a child of immigrants, I realized that there was a lot that was needed in terms of the work and the knowledge in this area to enhance the lives of these particular groups of people, especially living in a Western more white, more European kind of society. And so, again, that was sort of a natural path of mine, which is how can I make my community and other ethnic communities live the best lives they can, and what kind of supports are available in place for them, and how can we enhance them. And so then it kind of evolved later on into focusing on older adults and teaching the psychology of aging at the university, and also working with not-for-profit and government organizations in this field.
I'm so glad you're here. We have so much to learn. We do. And there is a conversation which I know we're going to have in the future. So we're going to give a little teaser, but I want you to share a little bit more about kind of a brief overview of your ethnocultural elder abuse awareness project with Carya and how we impact those older adults in that way.
So the project that I'm doing here at Carya is a very important but a very near and dear kind of thought that we had as an organization, but also as a society, working in this field of aging and being an advisor in the Ministry of Seniors here in the province of Alberta. There is a huge interest towards protecting the safety of, supporting, enhancing quality of life of older adults, and focusing on preventing elder abuse. And we also have World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, WEAD, which is on the 15th of June. And so there seems to be a huge increase in the need to understand, because we are seeing a growing older adult population. And the concern is, are we equipped to protect them? But not just that, but also to support older adults to thrive and continue to have value in our society. So the project that I'm doing here at Carya is a project that focuses on the nuances and the ways that ethnically, linguistically, culturally diverse people and communities talk about elder abuse, and whether or not those conversations and the definitions are the same as the Western definitions based on the World Health Organization, and also various ministries and organizations. And if there is a difference in that definition, how do linguistically and culturally diverse people talk about elder abuse, and also whether or not they identify elder abuse within their communities? And if that's the case, what kind of resources and supports that are culturally competent and compatible to their needs could we provide them if they are not provided? And so I'm very excited that I'm part of this project.
Yeah, I know. I know. And I'm looking forward to sharing more about that. We're going to get into a bigger discussion around that on the podcast in the future. But your lens on diversity and dignity is the conversation we're having today, which is so important. We talk about how language matters, respect, all of that. And we're really finding the need and the opportunity to have conversations around this. So if we're starting out looking at older adults, what do you recommend? What strategies when we're communicating with older adults, particularly considering their varied cognitive abilities? So it's kind of a multifaceted question, but I'd love your insight on that.
I think, like I said, as we're becoming aware of the increase in number of older adults around us, we're realizing as well that we need to have a lot more knowledge and education that can help us thrive as a society, right? And the reality is, older adults do make up a very valuable and important part of our society, regardless of where that society is. And there's a realization that we really need to be mindful sometimes of the stereotypes that exist in our societies about older people, and how that not only impacts the person themselves, but also it impacts us or younger adults or the younger generations, because there is that internalized ageism and these stereotypes that we tend to seep into our own value and belief systems, and then we start to believe in it, and those things can impact us thriving when we become older adults. So it's very important to be mindful that words have power, and words, when they fall into a conversation, they could sometimes make or break the rapport and the trust that you're trying to build with the other person. And in particular, when you were talking about professional environments, when you have a client who is an older adult, it's so important to be mindful of how not only are your embedded stereotypes impacting the way that you're perceiving this person, their abilities and their value and their capabilities, etc., but it also could impact the conversation and the words that you use as well, that could make the individual who you're tending to or creating a health plan for, it can make them feel disrespected, undervalued, humiliated, probably even disappointed in the way that you're talking with them. And so it's very important to be mindful of what are the stereotypes that you're carrying and how is that impacting the way the conversation is being held and the words that you're using. Are they strength-based words? Are they words that carry this understanding that people have capabilities, they have value, and the way that you talk with them should maintain that dignity and that agency of theirs? Or are you talking to them from a deficit lens, kind of lens and perspective, where you're stripping away all those things from them and making them feel that they are dependent on you and incapable, and or are intellectually or cognitively incapable of making their own decisions? And so it's so important to be self-aware, and it's so important to be honest with ourselves about the stereotypes that we have and that we carry, and find ways where we can, as best as we can, put those aside, maybe acknowledge them, but put them aside so they don't interfere with the quality of the care that we're giving.
Completely. And I would say too, a lot of that stems from our own views on aging, right? Would you say that the words and the stereotypes and all of that is as we embrace our own aging, I think that more positive or respectful conversation will even form our views as ourselves as we're growing older.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that we do a disservice to our own selves when we devalue older people, because that is our future selves. This is who we will hopefully become in the future. And when I teach psychology of aging at the university, I always remind my students who are around the age of 18 to 20, 22, how would you feel if someone talked to you in a very demeaning or infantilized way? What are your interests and what brings you joy right now? And why do you think those should be taken away from you as you grow older? Or how would you feel if someone said, well, you can't do this now because you are 80 or 85, or segregating older adults, assuming that they can't provide value in our society. So I'm hoping from those conversations that I have with younger adults is that they could, for a moment at least, reflect and think of how would they feel if someone took this away from them, or treated them this way, in hope that that builds. I mean, I'm realistic. It's not going to change their minds immediately, but it hopefully builds and opens a door to opportunities for us to have conversations about that. And then at the end, to reflect on the knowledge accumulated as a result of this education and awareness about ageism and the stereotypes that do exist, and how
Yeah.
we enhance the quality of life of all people in our
Mm,
society.
I agree with that. And you brought up the term that I gotta read.
Infantilization.
Infantilization. There we go. From your perspective, what steps can we take as caregivers, as family members, so we can avoid using, there's a term called elder speech,
Yes.
or talking down to older adults.
Yeah. So elder speech and infantilizations, they are both negative ways of and devaluing ways of talking with older adults. It encompasses this incorrect belief that either you treat older adults as children, which is when you infantilize and you use terms of endearment, just like you're talking with a young child or a toddler. And then elder speech is, again, very demeaning, devaluing ways of conversing with them, maybe raising your voice, assuming that they can't hear you, and speaking very slowly as if they can't understand you. So those ways are really problematic because are not only embedded in society in general, but you see them sometimes quite more prominently, I should say, in environments or communities that older adults tend to reside in, whether it's senior living, retirement homes, long-term care, nursing homes, etc. Those ways of conversing holds this assumption that older adults cannot cognitively make sense of the world anymore, are intellectually lesser in their abilities than they were before, which are all incorrect. And if anything, what that does do to older adults is it's very hurtful, it's very disrespectful. It could lead to them feeling very upset and angry as well and resentful. But then for some older adults, it could also make them fall into that spiral of believing that this is how they should be talked with, and this is just the way of things going, right? Which is unfortunate and not true. And so I would just recommend to my students, but also caregivers and professionals, to talk with older adults the way that you would talk with any person, with any adult, with any individual, with the way that people talk with you, with respect, in a very calm tone, in a very normal tone. Don't exaggerate or over exaggerate words or the way that you're talking. And if anything, that's going to be far more beneficial for that older person to understand this conversation than if you talk to them in ways that you think should be, because of that belief that they're incapable anymore to understand.
You brought up the terms of endearment that we could use that could be maybe misconstrued or not welcome, and specifically in those different cultural contexts, right? When we're addressing our older adults, share with us more about that.
Yeah, we find that sometimes health professionals or aides, I would say as well, and staff members that might come from different cultures or who speak, a different language other than English as a main language, they might bring with them ways and methods of communicating as they did back home, perhaps, right? And we have to also be mindful that even this whole topic and conversation around ageism and elder speech, etc., even though the issue is a universal one, I think in Western society we're doing a really good job at addressing it and trying to acknowledge it and educate, whereas it might still be a problem in various parts of the world where it's not really addressed as much, which means that international, sometimes healthcare workers could still bring in some forms of stereotypical ways of dealing with older adults who are in living situations like community and older adult community settings. And so I always hope for this kind of best outlook, which is that new staff members that are employed in long-term care or senior living do go through very informed education sessions or training sessions, for example, talking about the do's and the don'ts and how to communicate with older adults. When I used to work in senior living, that was my role. It was to provide orientation and training for staff members as well as family and residents. But my focus with the staff members was creating a lexicon or a glossary of what to say or what not to say and what you could say in turn. So for example, not to use the word senior and use the word older adult or older person instead, and not to use dearie or honey or mama. Again, these could be things that back home maybe were more accepting ways of talking to older adults, but here this is not how we would like you to communicate with our residents. Use more proper terms such as Miss, Mr, or even their first name if they feel like they would like you to use that. And if all fails, I say ask them what they would like to be called by or how they want to be referred to by. Because again, people might come with these good intentions that I'm treating them like my grandparent or I'm treating them like my own parent, but at the end of the day, it has to be a very professional relationship and a professional way and respectful way of communicating with that person. They might not mind you referring to them as that, but I would err on the side of caution and not assume, and to refer to them in those respectful kind of terms.
Yes, from the family side too, I hear people make comments about like now I'm parenting my parent or or terms like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I have heard of this before, and again, I always, it's always very important not to judge and kind of try to be more curious about where did these ideas or these methods of communication come from, and maybe to try and address them in a way where you don't come across as a know-it-all or come across as someone who's being very, I don't know, picky about some of these things.
Right.
But I think it's very important for us to realize that it might feel like you're parenting your parent, but your parent is not your child and never
Right.
will be your child. And my concern usually is if you're thinking about the relationship in that way, where you are parenting your parent, you could unintentionally
Mm.
interact with your parent as if they were a child. And I think that might be sometimes a slippery slope. Again, I think it's very important to understand where the family is coming from in terms of that relationship and that way of thinking, and maybe to support them in finding alternative ways where you don't feel like you're parenting your parent, because I do believe that regardless of maybe the dynamics and the roles changing because of health related concerns or declining cognitive capacity of a parent, they still are aware of the fact that they are your parent, even if they might not be able to verbalize and communicate that. And I think it might actually be not beneficial for their quality of life and well-being if they tend to have that stripped away from them.
Such good points. Good reminders. I think it's something that we need to hear and have those conversations as we're working with our loved ones and in communities. Just the awareness of how much our words matter is just such an important dialogue for us to have. It really is.
I mean,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think there's a place for this concern that we have for the well-being of our parents. And, for me as an immigrant, where my parents, even though they speak English and navigate a Western society, there are times where my mom comes to me and says, would say, I've received a letter. Can you read it? Can you tell us what it means? And it doesn't mean that I'm parenting them.
Right.
It's just the realization that there will be times where our parents or our older loved ones and family members might not have that awareness or that knowledge in a particular area. And I think, if anything, I feel very honored that they would ask me for my support and advice, because usually it's the other way around. But again,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that I have the right to take away that agency and that status of theirs, which is that they are my parent at the end of the day.
Looking at the cultural diversity among older adults, how can we, as caregivers, professionals, better understand and cater to those individual needs? Really understanding it's not one size fits all. And I've loved your insight on this when we've talked before about how we do that. How do we do that while knowing that our nation really is made up of immigrants and people from all beautiful different backgrounds?
Absolutely. And I think we see that in Canada and the US and various parts of, let's say, the Western world, which is there's an influx of immigrants who are either entering to build on the socioeconomic status of the society that they're moving into, and being part of the economy. And then at the end, they might age in those same societies or grow older or bring family members who are older adults as well. And so I really think it's only right for us, if we do want to be a country or a nation that is open to differences and open to diverse people and accepting of all people, and to provide that sense of belonging and inclusiveness, is to realize that some of our paradigms and some of our systems and way of thinking and way of um, processing particular lifespan experiences, especially older adulthood, has historically come from a very white Western way of thinking. And that also goes for example, the medical paradigm, where it looks at health from usually a very individualistic kind of lens, right? Whereas we have immigrants who are holistic in their wanting of well-being and their sense of wellness, which means that we need to also incorporate and include spiritual and religious well-being and wellness, because that could be a part of who they are as individuals. And I think we should be very open to that, because it's about them and it's not about us. Mm-hmm. It's about what they would like to enhance their quality of life, and not what we as organizations or as service providers assume they would need from us, right? And so I'm all for having an open dialogue and conversation with community members and service providers to see, to meet in that middle ground and find out what community needs are and what services do we have available for those needs. And if we don't have them, then to maybe look at either adapting existing services and resources to meet those particular needs, or, and the reality is sometimes that we have to create and develop new ones, because now we have become aware that not everyone speaks English and not everyone has a one particular religion and or one set of way of thinking about life.
Right. And a large amount of care is also provided in those senior living communities. Have you found any studies that have revealed any notable data regarding this cultural diversity of staff, of residents in those care communities? And does it impact or influence the care provided?
Even the research that looks at older adults and the ethnic diverse populations that are growing, let's say in North America, they're actually relatively recent in terms of the interest and the research that is around or available. And so from some of the articles or some of the research that you can come across, you'll find that particular communities that look after, or let's say older adults would reside in, they're predominantly white European Caucasian communities that cater for that particular group of people. And on the other spectrum, healthcare professionals that are working in those places tend to be more ethnically diverse individuals. So you have almost two differing groups in terms of ethnic backgrounds. You have white European Caucasian, but then you have ethnic diverse ones who usually tend to be the providers, the HCAs, the LPNs, etc. And we find that sometimes the dynamics as a result of those two ethnic groups could be ones if the management and the operational side have become aware of the need to create more, I guess, diverse and more inclusive opportunities where there's conversation. Or sometimes they don't really pay attention to those things and hope for the best. So by that, I mean, realizing that you have more ethnically diverse healthcare workers, but more European, let's say, or white Western clients or residents. Mm-hmm. It's important to create opportunities where those two groups have conversations about what does it mean to be ethnically different, and how can we still maintain a very respectful and successful relationship, because it's one that could be a very long-term one. For example, there were incidents, for example, where researchers looked at whether or not older adult residents who held stereotypical or maybe racist perceptions, how would they interact with healthcare professionals? And yes, there's a lot of issues as a result of that, right? You have an older person who might say something quite discriminatory or racist towards a healthcare provider or a worker. And that is not a pleasant experience or situation to be in, because it could cause problems, but it also could cause disruption in the trusting relationship that is expected in that situation. And of course, staff would leave. So there'll be a huge staff turnover as a result of that if they feel that management isn't providing the support that they need in this situation. It's not just about the people who are paying your rent or
Mm.
paying the lease who are staying in your community. It's also about the people who are providing the support and resources or the services to those people as well. So being mindful of the dynamics in those relationships are very important.
Yeah, that's what came to mind is that mistrust, right? If you're not able to have those healthy dynamics, you're not going to be able to build the trust and care, right? When we provide care, there's a lot of intimacy that happens in those moments and how important it is to be able to foster that. So how do we do that well? Like how do we have more inclusive and welcoming environments, not only for staff, but for residents that have diverse backgrounds? And I know, in a previous conversation, we talked about Taco Day is not going to fix everything. That's
Yeah,
just a broad example, but looking at that.
I mentioned taco because it was one of those things that I really came across actually in real life, where the conversation was, well, we'll just, have Mexican food, and so it might come across as us being diverse, but it's more than that, really.
uh,
It's more than putting in photos, let's say, or stock photos on your website about diverse people. Um, Older adults who are potential clients or potential residents who walk into a community usually can tell, sometimes from that first visit of whether or not this community is right for them. Um, and I've had many conversations with potential residents and clients who walk in, but I've also had conversations with staff members who come from ethnic diverse backgrounds about how they feel about people who tend to be usually white Caucasian people walking into the community and then working in it. And so the conversations are really important to have because it acknowledges the concerns and maybe the questions and the curiosity that both parties have. But I think it's very important to have these honest conversations. And so I find that if you want to create an environment that is welcoming and inclusive and has that general sense of everyone can belong here, um, I think it starts off with upper management really creating safe environments in which if there is a concern, then that concern can be talked about and dealt with. And if there are questions that you can still ask them without fearing the responses, if you do ask these questions, regardless of how sensitive they may be, and if there was an issue where you did experience, let's say, some form of interaction that was negative, either with a resident or with a staff member, that you still feel that you can have that conversation with the management team that is involved in dealing with those conversations. And it's not about pretending and asking everyone to smile whenever you have a tour or walk-in coming in. I think it's more than that. And like I said, it's if it's not sensed in the first initial tour or visit, then it will be sensed later on. It's creating an environment where people generally feel respected and heard. And you don't need the fancy stuff. You don't need to put up the pinatas or the leprechauns or whatever it is where you're trying to portray that we're inclusive and we're diverse, etc. I think it's really complicated to talk about and show, but it's also easy to to show as well, just by organically having an environment that feels welcoming and respectful, right? And yeah, and that's basically, I mean, those are the things that I would tend to focus on the most. It's not about putting up and celebrating every single celebration, but it's about being curious and asking residents and staff members, tell me more about where you come from. Tell me more about the celebrations that you celebrate. What languages do you speak? And sometimes it's just honoring those diverse answers or experiences sometimes in subtle ways and in personal ways. They don't have to be all big and all out.
I agree. It is the simple and the questions and showing up with curiosity and learning and wanting to learn about the world around us and the people and what they bring in their rich culture to that. Are you seeing that there is cultural competence training for staff in senior communities? What should that training include? Do you have any insight or thoughts about that?
Yeah, I don't think there's much of it happening,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And that's unfortunate, right? I think there's a
Which
lot
is
that
why we're talking about it, right?
there's a
Yeah.
lot that's needed, whether it's in Canada or the US. I don't think a cultural competence when it comes to senior living, especially, is really focused on. And so, definitely, I think more of that needs to happen if you're wanting to create a community that seems open to and accepting of all people, regardless of their skin color and their ethnic backgrounds.
Mhm.
So, again, I would say if I were to take my own parents into any adult living community, I would like to have them feel that they have that sense of I see myself here, I see myself belonging and fitting here, I see myself being respected and honored here. And again, it doesn't have to be showy offy in terms of the way that these things are portrayed, but it's by being curious. So tell me more about yourself and tell me more about your interests and tell me more about where you come from, right? It could be honoring the person's language or honoring a person's ethnic background, like I said, in subtle ways. And it's those methods of being curious and trying to understand your residents that should then be reflected in the way that you're training your staff members as well, by then also being curious about them, because it's never a one-way street. You can't expect your staff to provide what you are not providing for them, which is respecting and
So
respecting who
true.
they are, where they come from, and honoring their own journeys as well, right? You have to exemplify that in the way that you're treating them. And I find that training staff and providing them with knowledge and education empowers them, and it gives them these tools of knowledge and awareness that they can then also use to be the best they can be in what they're doing in that community. So yeah, cultural competency and humility is an important part of being open-minded about diverse backgrounds of people. And you don't really have to know everything about every culture because that's impossible, really.
Yeah.
What this training should provide is a way of respecting and appreciating and honoring
Mhm.
the cultural differences of people, and just being open-minded to the fact that there are people who think differently and have different values, and that's fine just as it is.
Yeah, which is a practice we should be doing in our lives, no matter our age or environment, right? Just that we should always be having that lens, I believe, my perspective on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do that, right? I mean, even we teach our kids this, it's okay if you don't agree with what they said, as long as you're respectful in providing them with this holding space, basically, right? About their different views and perspectives and listening to that and understanding where they're coming from and not being judgmental about it just because it's different. So we teach our children that, but we
Mhm.
tend to forget that that is also an important part and component of the interactions that could happen in senior living as well.
Yes. I'm noticing, this is just my view, from leadership and in aging services in the care economy in senior living communities. There is a lack of cultural diversity in leadership roles. And I feel that that also plays a role in our what we view of that because they're more of the, I would say, on the forefront of I'm trying to figure out the right words to use here. The visibility is higher, right? And so when we don't see that in that leadership position, and I'm speaking in broad general terms, we know that there are those roles that do have that component to it, but broadly, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'm probably the person who will talk about these things and never shy away from it. And that's the reality that we're seeing, actually. I mean, if you look at upper management, senior roles in older adult communities, senior living, whatever you want to call it, it's usually a particular group of people who hold higher positions. And you can't, what is that saying? You can't be what you can't see.
Mm, yeah.
Um, Not to say that, you know, senior positions and management positions aren't or cannot be um, competent and compassionate in those diverse ways. But I think it just becomes a bit problematic when you are in an industry in which things were done in a particular way for a long period of time, and you tend to naturally fall back into this comfort way of doing things. And it's comfortable and we're used to it and it's always worked. So why rock the boat and try to change things? People are a bit reluctant to do that. But I think in the long run, if you envision the future, it might be far more beneficial for an industry to be very open to acknowledging the necessity of these kind of ways of looking at things, because immigrants will make up a larger number of people who are either going to be working in those kind of environments or just naturally part of the society that we're living in and are embedded in our society as a result. And so it is one of those really interesting observations, and you're not alone in that. That if, let's say, you have a way of thinking or maybe a training proposition that helps other staff members become a little bit more aware of the diversity of workers, professionals, or residents. If upper management who are looking at things in one way and in one lens don't see the same thing that you see, then it can become a bit of a problem sometimes, unless you have ways to override that or convince them otherwise.
Right. Have an insight into it. Yeah. You said that so eloquently. You really did. And it just shows how you have such a compassionate heart in what you're doing. So thank you for speaking to that. I know, hard conversation. It is. It is. So what advice would you give to our listeners, primarily older adults, caregivers, in terms of understanding and addressing all of these unique needs that we talked about today? Is like final words of wisdom that we can learn from you.
Honestly, I think the best piece of advice that I was given myself that I absolutely love to share with people is always be curious, because when you're curious, you really leave no space for judgment. And that curiosity could come from asking, tell me more. Tell me more about where you came from, or tell me more about your interests, or tell me more about your childhood. As much as the person would like to share with you, of course, and feels comfortable with in terms of disclosing, but um, being curious about a person's life journey, I think, opens the door for you to be able to understand where they're coming from and put things into context and understand what methods are best for this individual in order to thrive in this particular community based on this understanding that you had about their past or their future and where they want to end up being. So I also don't really stop with who were you in the past. I also ask, what do you want to become when you are older or in the
Love
future?
that.
It doesn't matter if they're 85 or 105. I think it could be one of those funny questions that they probably never have been asked before, because in their mind, you stop really wanting to be something when
Mm.
you reach that point of adulthood. So it's a really great conversation to have. And that curiosity is very important, but it tells the person that you're talking with that you truly, genuinely want to find ways that work for them, where you can support them. But when family members hear of your interest in that person and their family member's life, I think it also helps with them building that sense of trust with you and that rapport with you, that you're not in it just to get the money who are genuinely wanting to find ways that can help their family member and loved one thrive. And that in itself will help build that trust with the family members. And I've always said, if you build a great relationship, rapport, and trust with residents and family members, they are your free walking advertising billboards. You don't need to pay to advertise. They will do the advertising for you. They'll tell their family and they'll tell their friends, and they'll tell their friends who have family members who are thinking of moving into communities like that. So there is an investment, but there is going to be a great reward. And how great does it feel when you know that you've made a difference, a positive difference in someone's life? And so that's what I would advise them. Be curious and ask.
Such good advice. That is great advice. And what are you excited about the future? Where can we learn more from you, connect with you?
I'm always excited about something, and I think that's just part of who I am, but that's also fed into my overall ever want and need of learning, because I do honestly believe that you never stop learning, and there's always something different, a perspective or a way of looking at things that that you can pick some knowledge and gems from. And so I'm really excited about the project, of course, that I'm doing with Carya about ethnocultural elder abuse. I think would be very helpful for linguistically and culturally diverse people to have a say and the supports that they need to help them stay safe and be safe and not be taken advantage of.
Mm.
I'm excited, of course, about listening to this podcast again and learning more from your podcasts and all the wonderful interviews that you do with people. I gain knowledge and I gain insight from listening to those conversations that you have. So thank you so much for that. And people can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm usually on.
Yeah, you have to go find her. I learned so much from you, and it's so wonderful to read and hear and see all that you are doing. And we're just so thankful for you for being here. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you looking for more support and community? We sure are. That is why I'm so happy to highlight one of my favorite podcasts in the caregiving community, Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver, hosted by my friends and sisters, Natalie Elliott Handy and JJ Elliott Hill. They offer a unique blend of personal storytelling, expert advice, and candid conversations that shed light on the real-life challenges and triumphs that caregivers face. Tune in to Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver wherever you enjoy your podcasts, or explore more on their website at www.confessionsofareluctantcaregiver.com. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.